Good day, everyone, and welcome. We're so pleased that you all could join us for this wonderful panel, Focus on Research, Media Coverage of Rape and Sexual Harassment of Women in the Global South. It's a very important area of research indeed. My name is Janine Relly. I'm a professor in the School of Journalism at the University of Arizona, and I'm also Director of Global Initiatives for the Center for Border and Global Journalism here. I'll be the moderator for today's panel with our truly impressive scholars. Before I introduce our colleagues, though, I want to thank our colleague, Dr. Jatin Srivastava, Director of the Institute for International Journalism at Ohio University. And he has led and partnered with us for this event, and we're really thrilled about that. I also want to thank the Director of the Center for Border and Global Journalism, Dr. Celeste Gonzalez de Bustamante, who is here with us, and also our Research and Outreach Associate, Mandy Loader. We also want to thank our sponsors for the support, including the Asia Pacific Media Educator and Chief Editor, Sundeep Mubidi, the Delhi Metropolitan Education Noida, India, Dr. Ambrish Saxena, Dean of the Media School, and then Dr. Amika Ray Memorial Trust, India, Dr. Ankuran Dutta, and the South Asia Communication Association, Dr. Deb Aki. We also want to announce that there is a call out for papers for a special issue of the Asia Pacific Media Educator, and want to encourage you all to take a look at that. Dr. Srivastava, I think you're going to be posting in the chat of the call, or we'll make sure that you all get it if it's not going there. The co-editors are Professor Srivastava and Dr. Pallavi Guha, who's one of our speakers today. We don't anticipate that we will need to do this. However, if there happens to be a disruption to our panel known as a Zoom bomb, we will direct everyone to exit the platform and will immediately send you a fresh Zoom link and email to come back. We hope that doesn't happen though. The format of the panel today will be each speaker will talk for about up to 15 minutes. I'll follow up with each speaker with a question or two, and for a 2 to 5 minute exchange. And then after our third speaker is finished, we will open the panel to questions. And because we have such an impressive number of attendees, we will be taking questions in the chat for the question and answer session. I will read to the panelists those questions, and then they'll respond in the 30 minutes remaining or so. So now, the reason you all are here, I'd love to introduce our distinguished panelists. Dr. Pallavi Guha is an assistant professor in journalism at Towson University. She is author of the recently published book, Here, #MeToo in India, that was published by Rutgers University Press. Her book has also been part of Ms. Magazine's February 2021 list of feminist books and writers. Dr. Guha's research includes anti-rape and sexual harassment activism on mass media and social media platforms, gender roles in the electoral campaign, and social media. She also has worked internationally for some leading organizations, including the BBC News and the Times of India. And the title of Dr. Guha's talk today is Here, #MeToo, Practicing Feminist Methods and Theorizing Sexual Violence in the News and Social Media. Our second panelist is Dr. Rasha Albiati. She's an assistant professor of political communication at Future University in Cairo, Egypt. She is specialized in the thematic intersections of media and politics, covering issues such as mediated gendered identities, cultural geography and geopolitics, imagery and memory, the politics of fear, media policies, censorship, and public diplomacy, among other areas. She is principal investigator in the research project that looks at journalistic role performance, and she's an affiliated researcher at the Global Risk Journalism Hub. The title of her talk today is Sexual Violence Against Women in Egypt, Analyzing the Role of Conventional and Social Media. Our third panelist is Dr. Shamin Reza, who teaches media and communication in the Department of Mass Communication and Journalism at the University of Dhaka in Bangladesh. Before joining academia, he worked with Save the Children UK as a child rights advocacy manager. Among other responsibilities, he was engaged in the projects and campaigns related to prevention of violence against women and children. His research is focused on development communication, media policies and regulations, community broadcasting and the public sphere, children, young people, and media, and as well as environmental communication and campaigns on preventing violence against women and children. Again, we want to enthusiastically thank our panelists and the attendees for joining us today. Dr. Guha, it's up to you now.
Thank you so much. So just give me a moment as I share my screen, and we will get started. Is my screen visible to everyone? It should be a slide. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So thank you, Dr. Rayleigh, for the wonderful introduction, and good morning, everyone who's in the Northern American time zone, and good afternoon, good evening to others who are joining in from various other time zones. Thank you so much for sharing your Saturday morning, afternoon, evening with us to participate on this very important topic today. I want to start by thanking Dr. Srivastava for organizing this panel. A very important panel, especially in the month of Women's History Month, and all the other organizers and sponsors as well to support this talk: IIJ, Center for Border and Global Journalism, DME, ARMT, APME, and SACA for partnering. Dr. Riley, thank you for moderating the session, and as always, wonderful introduction. Very happy and excited to be in the august company of scholars, Dr. El Ibiera and Dr. Reza too. So without taking much time, let's get started. So today I'll be focusing on practicing feminist methods, as well as theorizing sexual violence in news and social media platforms in digitally emerging spaces, such as the Global South, and more specifically, India as well. So much of this talk and the analysis, as well as the findings based on data, is from my recently published book here, #MeToo in India, by Rutgers University Press. The book focuses primarily on the #MeTooIndia movement, as well as how it impacts, and it has impacted, the anti-rape and feminist activism on social media, as well as news media platforms as well. So my research, it does focus on India primarily, but I strongly believe that it could be implemented as well as contextualized and practiced in other global South spaces as well. And it's going to give us an opportunity to kind of move a little bit away from the global North framework of not just explaining in terms of academic scholarship, but also in the broader media coverage of sexual violence and sexual assault whenever a survivor or even a victim is from the global South. So primarily, I focus on #MeToo, not just #MeTooIndia, but the global #MeToo movement, which happened in 2017 as a transnational movement, and how it moved from one part of the world globally to the other parts of the world, and its impact on sexual violence activism across the world. So if I'm sure I can assume that most of you have seen the #MeToo Google visualization, which Google created in 2017, right after the movement started. If not, then I would urge all of you to take a moment and look up. So Google created this visualization, and you can look at it like in live, what people across the world they are focusing on, what they are looking up, searching for #MeToo and #MeToo globally. So you can look up based on the news that they are looking for. It could be other information, any kind of searches that include #MeToo. And it shows a wonderful visualization where you can see the blips across the world on this map. And it shows how much people are focusing on and which countries specifically are looking at the searches the most. And it has a timeline as well, starting from 2017 to live as it's happening now. And they do a good job of updating it as well. So this shows that definitely the movement worked and moved across the various parts of the world, right? But how much it moved and how much it impacted in the interiors of the global south. So that is something that I became really interested to analyze. And this book helped me to do that as well. So for instance, if we talk about India, the rise of the movement was prolific, not just in 2017, but also in 2018, when there was a second wave or a reincarnation of the movement as #MeTooIndia. But it did not sustain as much. So for the first month or so, the movement was very strong. There were several, if you look at the waves and look at the number of #MeToo and #MeToo tweets and searches that were done, it was kind of very, it was very impactful. But as we moved away in time, we saw that it kind of dipped, the sustenance dipped for to a large extent. And I found this while interviewing my participants. I had an opportunity to speak with rural and semi-rural activists in India as well. And I found that even in the #activism era of Me Too and #MeTooIndia, the rural and feminist activists and journalists, they experienced and saw the impact of the movement very differently. And I want to talk a little bit about the #Nirbhaya movement of 2012, which happened after the brutal gang rape and murder of Jyoti Singh in Delhi, also known as the infamous Delhi gang rape. And I want to really not compare, but analyze both contextually. And I found that #MeTooIndia did not really make any agenda-related changes. Yes, there has been a landmark judgment for it very recently on February 17th, if I recall correctly, for Ms. Priya Ramani and the #MeTooIndia movement. But there wasn't any policy-related or agenda-related changes. There was a government committee which was set up in 2018 to look into sexual harassment at workplaces, but it was dissolved in 2019 without any recommendations or announcements. So it kind of shows how it was not integrated in any kind of public agenda building or even political policy making. Unlike #Nirbhaya movement, which culminated into policies. There was a commission that was set up in 2013 and the Justice Verma Commission, and then there were policies that were created as well. So this was a grounding point. And this was also a point which I discussed several times with my participants as well. So the movement, #MeToo and #MeTooIndia both, they made ripples in the news as well as social media platforms, but it did not reach everywhere. And this is when I kind of understood and realized that intersectionality of class, caste, religion matters, yes, but also how intersectionality of location impacts the hierarchy and gatekeeping, not just between the global north and the global south, but also within the global south, which influences and impacts the anti-rape and sexual harassment movement as well as its coverage. And to illustrate that, I want to talk about, I want to share I would say two anecdotes, one from the conversation I had with one of the rural and semi-rural activists while writing this book, and another one that I also talked about in my book. So I talk about a rape survivor, a young woman from Unnao. It's a small village in UP. She was raped by a state legislative member of the ruling party in 2017 but there was very limited coverage or activism for her until there was an attempt on her life in around May or June of 2019. But when the hashtag #MeTooIndia was at its peak in 2018, she was interviewed by a rural journalist on the movement, and she was specifically asked how was she going to use the hashtag to get justice for herself, and what was she thinking about the global feminist movement. And this is what she had to say, and I quote, "I don't have a phone, I don't watch TV, so I have absolutely no idea what is going on. I tried to seek justice, but I lost my father." And this lack of digital access not only makes the rural and marginalized women vulnerable to rape and sexual assault, but when no one speaks for them, it also supports the system in harassing them because they cannot share everything online. And this was a reminder to myself, not just as a scholar, as a researcher, but also as a human being, that sharing experiences of sexual violence and assault on online platforms is a privilege, which became more clear to me when I had this conversation with Shutopa. She's a rural feminist activist, and she works in one of the semi-rural areas in India, in West Bengal to be specific. And she shared, when I asked her about the impact of #MeToo and #MeTooIndia in her community, she said that the younger girls and women, they are aware of the hashtag. So they have access to smartphones, they have access to social media platforms, they know what is happening, but there is no impact of the hashtag. And you may ask me, what does it mean that there is awareness? Awareness means impact. So she clarified it better, and I'm just going to explain how she did that. She said that the girls they know what is happening, but they cannot share their experiences of sexual harassment on using the hashtag on social media platforms. And then there are various factors due to that. It could be due to access, it could be living in closer proximity to their abusers, and it's also related to community and societal pressures. So one of the ways in good faith their families or community would react to provide safety after knowing or hearing of the sexual harassment would be asking the girls to continue education through distance learning. If sexual harassment is happening in educational institutes, you can, continue your education at home. If sexual harassment is happening on your way to somewhere, a male relative would accompany you. So, the reaction would be providing safety by limiting access to public spaces. And that is not something that they wanted. So they don't have the privilege to share their experiences of sexual harassment, but then they are aware of others who are doing this. Now, this context of how women survivors as well as feminist activists in rural communities, they kind of navigate their everyday community pressures and how they do activism is often not covered by the global north. For the global north, it's a one-size-fits-all narrative. And I found that, again, during my conversation, not one, but a couple of feminist activists in the rural communities and areas, when we were talking about sexual harassment, sexual assault, they asked me that, so this problem doesn't exist where you are in the US, right? And for a moment, I was kind of, quiet, and I asked them, why do you ask that? And again, they said, well, we never read about it in the newspapers. So all we read about are, what's happening here, specifically in India, specifically in the communities. We never read about such things happening. So I had to tell them, no, it's very much there, but it was also, again, a jarring reality and a realization to myself that to kind of acknowledge the importance of location, because news is typically produced by a Western news organization from a Western perspective. and reporters and sources are Western. So often survivors, victims, and even feminist activists, they are othered. They are represented as victims without understanding of their varied local context. So that was kind of an acknowledgement as well as realization. I'm going to move on in the interest of time and not talk about intergenerational gatekeeping while recruiting. And I'm going to keep it for the Q&A if you may have any questions for me. So based on these findings and analysis, these kind of helped me to theorize sexual violence in news and social media in digitally emerging spaces, which again, I believe could be used in other, the Global South framework as well. And I offer the concept of interdependent agenda building here, which emphasizes on the interdependent association between social media networks and mainstream mass media, having the ability to build a public agenda and later policies as well in digitally emerging spaces. It's important to acknowledge here that I found at least until 2019, newspaper circulations in India was growing at the rate of 4.4%, very unlike the other locations, especially the global north. Even there were a lot of news channels that we come across, not just in English language, but other local languages as well. And this shows the importance of news media. While we see that social media platforms are evolving, they're becoming more matured, more people have access to social media platforms. I mean, if you compare between 2012 and 2017, 2018, and now, not just that the social media platforms have evolved, but at the same time, we see more number of social media platforms. So that makes a lot of difference. So we have to acknowledge the importance of both the platforms here. At the same time, culturally, economically, politically, as well as digitally, India is one of the most diverse countries in the world. So how does social media, news media react to the activism around rape and sexual violence is significant. So there is no doubt, like I said, social media empowers the victims and survivors to know about others and share their experiences, but it also puts them in precarious positions because not everyone is able to share their abuse on these platforms. And this is where journalists and newsrooms come in to investigate and share news of rape and sexual violence. I do want to acknowledge here and share that survivors and activists from rural India, they still consider journalists and news media as platforms of justice, which are going to amplify their struggles. And this is related to also the survivor from the Unnao in 2019, when she was injured. Her mother, she gave an interview to one of, again, the smaller portals. She categorically said that only the media can give us justice. So if you don't amplify our voices, if you don't tell our stories, how can we expect justice? So there are many victims as well as survivors of sexual violence who get left behind by both the news and the social media platforms, especially in rural and semi-rural areas. And I'm hoping this is where the interdependent agenda building theorizing is going to help to focus not just on one platform, but both platforms. So during the course of this writing this book, I found that both rural journalists and feminist activists, they definitely recognize the power of social media, but they did not neglect the mainstream media. So the role and relevance of mainstream news media became very important when we talk about location specific and contextualize it, because now social media platforms are so prevalent, but we completely cannot neglect these mainstream media platforms. So I want to end by saying that the journalists and activists, they have shared their knowledge in my scholarship and in my book as well, and they have helped me to create this emerging concept to theorize sexual violence in news and social media, especially in the global South. However, I must acknowledge that these experiences and stories are from a select few, And there are many whose stories are not represented as well, but whatever I have heard, I have tried to explain that and contextualize it specifically using the locational framework here. So I hope this talk gave you an overview of the Global South framework and also what to expect in my scholarship and in my book as well, and be interested. Thank you so much for patiently listening in, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks so much for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Guha. I have a chance here to just ask a question or two, and then we'll have the big Q&A at the end, but really fascinating theoretical and empirical work. I'm just wondering two quick things. One is looking at, you'd mentioned really the profound revelation that, or the point about limited access to public space, as well as limited digital capacity, and how that affected the voices of folks. Can you talk, did the narratives in the media and news media coverage talk at all about that? And did the activist work to advance anything beyond protecting the individuals by their family members going with them, or keeping them out of public spaces? And were there any suggested efforts to advance digital capacity? That was one. And then the other is, and this is outside of your research, so we can punt it out if you just don't answer it. But I remember, obviously the Delhi case, and I was super aware at the time. I'm not sure where I was, but I remember thinking, how many rapes there are in the United States and other parts of the world, and how much publicity that particular case was getting, and wondered about what you thought about that. It seemed it fairly amplified, even though it was a horrendous case, but in the context of the world of violence against women, it seemed really amplified. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful questions, Dr. Ali. Let me start by answering your second question. I do talk about at length in my scholarship in the book about how the Delhi gang rape of 2012, it kind of got amplified. And several journalists, so I did have the opportunity of interviewing journalists who had covered that, who had covered the rape and sexual violence. And all of them had one thing to say: it would not have been amplified so much if it was not Delhi, because Delhi is the capital. Even in Delhi, it would not have been amplified as much if it did not happen at that particular place. So that was, again, location was, it kept coming up in our conversation over and over again. That was one factor. The other factor around the same time, 2011, 2012, there were a lot of social movements that were happening, not just in India, but globally. So that kind of social media movements were also getting amplified. So all of these factors, they kind of amplified the Delhi gang rape, as well as, just the horrendous and brutal rape and murder. And, they kind of impacted its coverage, I would say. But there were other journalists who said that very unfortunately, such brutal gang rapes and murder, they happen even in the rural and semi-rural areas. Like, they do happen, but it doesn't get amplified. It's because one of the reasons, because it happened in Delhi. It is the country capital. And let me answer your first question. So your first question was, it's how, if you can just, rephrase that just in a sentence. I just lost the train of thought, sorry.
Looking at the type of activism reported beyond, the limited space and the digital issues, like, were the organizations pushing for more? Was that reported, or did you look at that?
Right. So I spoke with activists, feminist activists who worked in their individual capacities, mostly because they are like grassroots feminist activists. And one of the things they did some of them belong to smaller towns, some of them belong to villages. They have this weekly meetings where they try to raise awareness and they encourage women and girls to share their experiences of sexual harassment, any kind of sexual assault. So they say it's a safe space for them where they kind of interact and also try to understand the issues individually, and sometimes they go and meet the families so that they can tell the families, you can do this, and based on what the survivor or the victim is experiencing, or you should do that. So they do try this in their individual effort. As far as the themes are concerned, and the journalists who cover rape and sexual harassment, I found several themes, like common themes. If it's happening around any political campaign or election, it becomes quickly politicized. It becomes, scandal is associated with it, and it's just completely covered and reported differently. A lot of times, they are co-opted by the entertainment industry. And this is pre-corona, like pre-COVID-19. There would be these press releases, and then a journalist would ask a leading celebrity, an entertainment celebrity, the thoughts, and it would be hashtagged with the movie that's coming up, or with the celebrity. So that would also happen. But one of the ways I found that the rural feminist activists, they kept in touch with the journalists through WhatsApp. So WhatsApp is a platform that's widely used, especially in India. They use these closed platforms like texting to let them know, we are having this problem, we are trying to pick it and raise awareness, but the authorities are not cooperating. How can you help us? Or, can you amplify? But then this doesn't get covered as much. And one of my my participants, he's a rural, semi-rural journalist, and he said, the power of Facebookish, it has changed. And it's the power of being Facebookish. So he did talk to me about the difference between covering rape and sexual violence in 2005 as compared to 2019, because now the newsrooms, they don't want to neglect the number, the incidence of rape and sexual assault. But it would depend on the news cycle of the day, whether it would go on page 1 or page 4 or 5. But earlier it would go after 2-3 days. Now they don't want to be called out. So that's the difference that I also found. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Albiati, we would love to hear you now. Make sure you're you're pinned. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Hello, everyone. I would like first to thank you and thank Professor Jatin and all the organizations and institutions sponsoring this panel. I am very proud to be among you today and to make this presentation. I have actually prepared something small. I'll just share the screen first. So it is about sexual violence in Egypt, basically. And I'm looking primarily at the roles of conventional and social media. Well, sexual violence, we can say, is endemic in Egypt. And when I say sexual violence, this includes harassment and rape and all types of violence exercised against women and girls. And this is quite enhanced by the society in the first place, and also by the regime and by basically the entire society, including men and women, by the way, because there are a lot of women who even are part of this, basically, who would not encourage, for example, holding those who are guilty to justice and things like that. So I need to do this. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about some statistics related to that issue in Egypt, and then about the culture and the media, and then about the legal, some points related to the legal framework, and then on social media. And I will talk also about case studies, because this is the approach that I usually take in my research regarding sexual violence on women, because there are case studies that need to be studied in detail, so that we find out the different angles and the different aspects related to those case studies, basically. So, so starting with the statistics, first of all, according to UN Women, for example, in 2013, they said that sexual violence and harassment reached 53% of Egyptian women, including political violence aimed at stereotyping and excluding them from political life, 27%, and also domestic violence, 20%. Another source indicated that there are 12% of women who do not report harassment in fear of societal attack. I speculate that the percentages are probably now much higher. Also, Egypt has been ranked at the 6th most unsafe countries for women in the world, because of this culture that we are talking about, of course. So these are some of the statistics. In addition, also the UN Women have indicated that there are 99% of Egyptian women who say that they have been subjected to sexual harassment at least once in their lives. Among those women, there are 49% of them saying it happens daily, and 48% say it happened more since the 2011 uprising. And this is this relates a lot to what my colleague was just mentioning, is that since 2011, a lot of things have changed, a lot of social media use has happened, and also a lot of violence has been taking place, or has been documented, in other words. Maybe before it has been taking place, but not documented on social media, so nobody heard of them. So maybe social media here plays an important role in putting them under the limelight, I would say. And also, just like it happened in India, it happened a lot in Egypt. There are 500 reported cases of mob sexual harassment in Tahrir Square since January 2011. And I would say here that the location is part of the thing. Maybe it happened also elsewhere in Egypt, but nobody heard about it. So this is also another, I would say, similarity with India. So sexual violence against women, basically, it's as I mentioned before, it's a socio-cultural political phenomenon due to a lot of things, including a male-dominated culture, a patriarchal authority that regards women as inferior and men as superior, the deteriorating, of course, economic conditions, the widening gap between social classes and categories. All these are elements, basically, but also, in my view, there is no policy to overcome those elements. This is also another element, I would say. So when protesters in the early days of SCAF, for example, they were arrested and forced to undergo virginity tests, and reports of rape mobs in attacks emerged at that time. So this is also sexual violence. The media was completely silent about it until international NGOs were published, basically, and then the media started admitting that it has been happening. Also, sexual attacks against women continued during Morsi, and up to nowadays they continue to happen, of course. But what I was talking about here was the Tahrir Square protests that have taken place at that time. Then in 2014, there has been famous incident during the inauguration of the current president, is that there has been 9 gang rapes in Tahrir Square, basically, during the time of the inauguration of the president. So as a result of that, a new sexual harassment law was devised. The Egyptian Criminal Code divided crimes of sexual violence against women into two categories: misdemeanors and felonies. And misdemeanors, they include sexual harassment, they include felonies, they include FGM, rape, kidnapping of female, sexual assaults, and so on. And these are defined also in a paper for the Congress about sexual violence in Egypt, basically. Okay. So as for the media coverage, as for the media coverage, the mainstream media coverage of violence against women in Egypt has always been biased against women, basically. And the reason for that is that it's owned and administered by the regime that is also trying to limit women movement and women activities and all this sort of thing. So it is a tool in the hand of the regime, in other words, in order to limit women from taking certain actions and being positive, active, and so on. So and all the media, of course, as I said, it's controlled by the state, by the law. And there are a lot of laws that shows how the media has been controlled by the state. Okay. Okay, so the first case study I'm going to talk about has been widely called in Egypt the Blue Bra Girl. And this was a woman, actually, or a girl walking in Tahrir Square during December 2011, after the same year where our revolution have taken place. And she was fully covered in black. But as you see in the picture, the army guys basically stripped her in the square, and what happened is that there was a photographer who shot the picture. As a result, on the right part of the picture here, we can see graffiti. Basically, there was a lot of graffiti being drawn to show off basically a campaign against this incident, basically. So, so the situation of the media at that time has been is that Egyptian commentators, when they appeared on talk shows and in newspaper editorials, what they did, what they asked, they did not criticize what happened. Of course not. They criticized the woman. Why did she go there? That was the question that they raised. And posing this question reproduced already existing hegemonic gender norms that delegitimized women's participation in political protest, blamed the victims for the assault, also legitimized the violence against women. So these attitudes were not only expressed on state-owned media, but also in private media, which have been equally invested in promoting counter-revolutionary narratives or narratives against the women movement or the movement against the government at that time. However, ironically, this incident illustrated the significance of popular culture in challenging official narratives, because there was an explosion of graffiti on the streets of Cairo celebrating the bravery of the unknown woman, smashing the paradigm of shame and guilt about the female body, subverting those norms of gendered respectability and so on. So while street graffiti art and social media hashtags, they raised awareness about the incidents, they failed to hold the attackers to account or prevent the occurrence of more incidents. This is the irony here, is that there are some actions taken, but they don't amount to real change that is taking place. I will jump from 2011 to 2020, basically last year, after a law has been devised against sexual harassment, against attacking women and violence against women. And let us see what has happened. In July 2020, a blog appeared, and this blog did not carry the identity of anyone. It was called Stories of Book of Stories, basically, or the blog. And this is the logo of the blog in yellow that is down there in Arabic. And this blog basically carried testimony anonymous survivors of rape, sexual violence, who started reporting what is happening for them from their colleagues, from co-workers, from people they knew in terms of they met in life, and they started telling those stories. And one of the most important of those stories has been a case called the Ferment Crime. And this crime has actually happened since 2014, but the survivor could not talk about it or was not encouraged to talk about it before 2020. Can you imagine? Yeah, this is from my viewpoint something. It took her all those years to be able to talk. You see, so what happened is that she was raped by a group of men successively after giving her drugs, and this case includes sons of famous political and business figures in Egypt. And the case itself was forced out into the public sphere by the power of social media, and also the conventional media talked about it. Why is that? Because the woman talked. Finally, she decided to talk. This is a very important action that was encouraged by the fact that the blog, the people on the blog have the right not to mention their names. Why? Because the culture in Egypt, when any woman talk about what is happening to her, she is tamed. She is blamed for being a victim. She's not seen as a victim by the society. So the rapists were arrested from inside and outside Egypt. Some of them fled to Lebanon after they were exposed, after she wrote her testimony and she mentioned their names, and their names became on social media. They fled, and the authorities brought them to prison. However, this was in July, August, right? So let us see what happened just a few days ago. Okay, yeah, this is a website, and it's called Testimonies of Survivors of Sexual Violence. Basically, this is the blog, I mean. And this is what happened just in March 16. They actually, in this case, in this crime, they basically they arrested both those who committed the crime and also those who went there as witnesses. And this was unbelievable. And I read online a lot of calls for parents of young boys and girls who went there to just say their testimonies as witnesses, or people who were attending this party at the hotel in 2014, and they were arrested just for going there. Okay, so let us see what happened. One of the rapists paid 50K to be released from bail, basically, to be released. And the witnesses that were falsely arrested, they had to pay 100K to be released. And this is actually a screenshot of a tweet, basically, for the hashtag, carrying the hashtag, the crime of the Ferment. This is Egypt, this is today, basically. So this is the latest thing that happened in this case. And the case shows a lot of things. It shows that despite that we have a law, the law is not applied. When the law, they attempt to apply it, they don't apply it correctly. A few days actually before anyone goes there to say their testimony about this case, there was a law, basically, or a pre-law, basically, that the identity of witnesses will be protected. This did not happen. Their identities were not protected. They were published in the media, and people started attacking them for just being there. So all this shows that there is a deficiency in the application. Even if we have the law, even if we have the clause in the Constitution, that is great, we still don't have it, application for this. This is also another case that appeared on the blog and on Twitter also last August in 2020, last August. So it actually appeared in an anonymous account called the Assault Police, because it seems that no one dared to show their identity. And on this account, there has been a lot of testimonies for women and girls who were raped by this rapist, basically. So then he was arrested afterwards. And we have no idea if he's going to be penalized at all or not. So the Assault Police exposed the story of this serial rapist where women shared their stories using hashtags. Later, he was arrested on charges and a law was proposed to protect the confidentiality of sources to encourage women to report their stories to the authority. However, he hasn't been tried at all. So there are, he's just arrested, or this is at least what we know, but nobody knows the truth, basically. I will stop here because I don't want to take a lot of time. Well, I'm going to develop this, of course, into research. I did not go into theoretical aspects, basically, because I know that I have been taken more with the case studies. So currently, my what I'm proposing is the case study thing more than the theoretical framework for the study. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Albiati. Really compelling data for sure. And it's so great you're going to continue building that out. Just two questions, if you would.
Yeah, of course.
Is along the line of the NGOs publishing, and you mentioned early on that was somewhat driving the media from being silent. Is that been continuous? And so the NGOs, drawing attention to the issues, and are those domestic and transnational organizations, or mostly transnational?
Yeah. There are organizations, and the NGOs have historically played a very big role in Egypt in exposing this to the conventional media before the social media. And actually, it was the conventional media never reported sexual harassment things unless NGOs are making huge campaigns to compel them to cover those issues and get them to appear on TV to discuss this or that crisis. But social media, we can argue that it has a bit empowered people to do that. And I would categorize the blog, for example, that I talked about as an NGO, because they are helping women. They are proposing on the blog that they can support them. They can connect them to lawyers. They can connect them to psychologists. They can connect them to people who can help them survive the trauma. And also they can show their case. So this is showing their case on the blog is not the only activity. If they don't want to show their case, that's fine too. They can share it and get support through this blog.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
I think that might have answered my second question, which is whether it sounds like the anonymous posts do drive news coverage somewhat. I
don't know how to stop the share.
Oh, we can do that right here. Yeah, we can do that here. Let's see. I think that is on your side. Let me see.
Resume. Yeah, there. Here it has stopped.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so, do you think that you basically, the anonymous posts are driving some of the media coverage then today.
Yeah, of course, because things, when they are shared on this blog, people talk about them a lot in the on social media, and as a result, we find, for example, the National Center for Women, for example, posting on their website that they are available to help and things like that. Sometimes prosecutor post on their Facebook page that they are following what is going on and they are ready to get reports and things like that. So it happened that it pushed things forward, but to what extent and in whose favor, this is still an open question.
Yeah, well, it's so good you're there. You're continuing to follow it. Thank you so much. That was so excellent. Thank you. And we'll come back to all of you at the end. Dr. Reza, thank you. Go right ahead there. You said you don't need to share the screen. Yeah, well, I'm gonna, very good.
Yeah, well, there is a question here by Dr. Mona Badran. I can answer that. The relationship between the Egyptian regime and the enhancement of violence against women, other than the application of law. Okay, the thing is that, of course, it has been historically linked to the regime, because the Egyptian regime always used violence against women protesters, even before the revolution, when women used to go out at the journalist syndicate, for example, to have a stand-up there. There used to be gangs that go there and sexually harass women and so on. And there was a very famous case for a woman at that time who actually died afterwards, basically because of the trauma that happened to her. And also part of the gangs that used to appear in Tahrir Square are pushed there by the police and by the regime to stop women from going out. There is a very famous report, Mona, for an NGO in Egypt that says keeping women out. And it shows you that all this is to stop women from taking action, basically. Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Reza.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I get distracted, don't take it away. There are lots of bees around. There is a beehive shelf outside my window. So they're trying to poke in. It's not that I'm an anti-bee person. But the moment I turn on the light, they try to get in. I don't have any PowerPoint or any slide to share with, but I'll be talking mostly on the state of research on the media coverage of rape and sexual harassment of women, and the state of coverage of these issues in the mainstream media mostly. And I would like to thank my previous speakers, and we have similar experiences also here in this part of the global south in Bangladesh, when Liberia is saying that newspapers pick up only those issues being campaigned by the advocacy groups. And similar way, when Pallavi was sharing her experience of Delhi gang rape, it was also covered by the Bangladeshi mainstream media. And the issues might be looked into whether they covered it as a violence against women, or they covered it as a piece of foreign news that it's happening in the neighboring country. So that's a different side of the story. To start with, let me give you a general overview of the state of women in Bangladesh, or in this part of the global south. Well, from North America or from Europe, if you look at Bangladesh, it has been a fantastic case of economic growth these days. So that's one side of progress. But truly speaking, the considerable progress has been made towards achieving Millennium Development Goal and the newly introduced UN Sustainable Development Goal, in which the Bangladesh has achieved a considerable progress in reducing child mortality, in improving maternal health, in combating HIV/AIDS. Education rate or the literacy among girl children has improved significantly. I mean, that is a great progress been made in relation to women and children. women are contributing tremendously to export-oriented sector, like the ready-made garments, for example. And I think more than 90% of the workforce would be women. And increased number of women in the formal employment sector. But again, there's a disparity between the urban women and the rural women. And there has been lots of programs taken by both the government and non-governmental organizations like NGOs. And particularly the NGO initiatives for women empowerment are quite important here. You know, there has been a big NGO movement in Bangladesh. There are a few thousand NGOs operating in this country, and almost each of them has got some kind of program on women empowerment. But this is one side of development and women's positioning. There are, of course, other challenges. One of them is social stigma that women. So it does happen that stigmatization of women, and particularly in the case of rape or the sexual violence and harassment, then there are religious backlashes. Whenever something happens, you know, there are different interpretations, social interpretation, religious interpretations, and which again contribute to the silencing of the incidents. So you don't talk about it, and it's not reported in the news media. And then in relation to the development thing, I mean, what I was referring previously, some of the contributions in the economy, both informal economy, and the household things are not really accounted for. This is also one of the reasons that you know, so women are silenced. I mean, it's not only the violence against them, but also there are other contributions. The other economic contribution is not also recognized. And the low number of women in decision-making positions in the media. There are women these days. The number is increasing mostly in the broadcast media, in radio and in television compared to the newspaper. I remember my student days back in 90s when we could find only few female students doing their intern program in the newspapers or in the television. We didn't have many private television those days. But if you look at the situation now, the numbers are increasing. But unfortunately, they're not in the decision-making position. I don't recall that we have any female editor of any of the the mainstream big newspapers. There are women working in good positions in the television stations, the radio stations, but not really the top persons or the critical decision makers. There are some other policy challenges in the country, like there is a policy called Nari Niti, that the women policy. Part of the policy has been implemented, but many of the important areas are still debated and been opposed by the religious group, by the fundamentalists, in relation to the inheritance of property, the participation in some of the activities. So these all have got bearings on women's participation in the media, women's coverage in the media. So it's not very straightforward that we analyze women, the media coverage of rape and sexual harassment in a very linear way and not really taking into account these socioeconomic and political conditions. And access to media is another thing. There is no credible data available. If you take the government data, which doesn't give the detail of the women's participation or the number, both in mainstream media or in the social media. But as an observer, we can very well understand there's a disparity between the media user in the rural areas and in the urban areas. And also, the most important thing that I should notice is that the women's contribution to national history is still debated. It's not recognized that way. So combining all these things, I would, focus a little bit on my involvement in this area. Although I'm not going to talk about any particular study of mine, but depending on my teaching and research experience on women and media, and after attending lots of seminar, workshop, and colloquium has been going on for the last several years, and analysis of some of the women's campaign, I shouldn't say any movement. I don't, find any bigger movement like Nirbhaya or, #MeToo. And working with the media, as some of the television programs as Rita Tokshank or as a participant. So combining all this thing, what I'm going to first focus on the state of media coverage and what are the key issues. As I told you earlier, that I'll be focusing mostly on the mainstream media, which is television and newspaper, not a lot about radio. I'll be touching upon the social media issues a little bit. Well, it's mostly incident-based. So as Eliberius is talking about the Egyptian case, that whenever something has happened, then the mainstream media start focusing on that. Lots of news reports, lots of articles, the editorials are written on that. There are some famous cases or the sensational cases. Like one girl's name is Tanu. She was murdered and suspected that she was first raped and then murdered near a very sensitive government kind of institutions. I don't want to name it. And it has been, I think, 3-4 years. The case hasn't been solved yet. So whenever something has happened and the newspapers, the reporters get interested in, there are lots of coverage on the television. After a few days, maybe a week or even less than a week, it's gone. So you have to wait for another incident or another thing to happen, and then the media gets interested in that. And so are the editorials, so are the number of articles. And then I wouldn't say that our mainstream media do not set agenda. This is one of the most important agendas of the mainstream media. And they do talk about, they do try to set agenda against these cases of rape and sexual violence of women. But not all the newspapers have that strength to do that. Not strong enough, not politically courageous enough to do that. And again, I mean, if you consider the newspapers in the capital city, they behave one way. And if you go to the local newspapers, their coverage a little bit different. There's a similar way that the way Delhi people imagine the rape and sexual violence, it may not be the same case outside of Delhi. And then some of the media have got the politically biased. So if any rape case or any sexual harassment against women are considered to be politically sensitive, to try to avoid that. Items sometimes are taken over by other issues of development, economics, all the things. So sometimes these are considered just a women issue, not really as a national issue, as something violence against a section of population. But again, I'm not generalizing that all the news media do the same. But one thing is pretty clear, that until something sensational, very important incident has taken place, they don't want to continue it for a longer period of time. And now there is a serious lack of follow-up activities. And when something has happened, you do follow it up like after 6 months, after a year. So in terms of creating an impact on the readers and the audiences, or even setting a political agenda, it becomes difficult. It is difficult not only for the readers and or for the audiences, but also for the policymakers, for the campaigners, for the right activists to do something with this media coverage. With some of the newspapers, particularly the local newspapers, there is a lack of following ethical guidelines. So they do disclose the rape victim's identity. And there has been lots of campaigns and trainings about it by INGOs, international non-governmental organizations, the UN organizations, even many other international platforms try to do that. Even we were engaged in training of the journalists, to follow certain guidelines so that the rape victim's identity is not disclosed, to be more particular about publishing their photos and so on. But still the practice hasn't stopped fully. Some of the local newspapers, they do, even some of the national newspapers also sometimes, try to violate these ethical norms. But some newspapers, some televisions are practicing high standard of not disclosing the rape victim's photos, identity. Rather, they are trying to publish, the rapist in photos and so on. And but considering all this positive and the limitations side by side, there is a tendency of blaming the women as if they're responsible for all these things, which is a social phenomenon, but sometimes it's been reflected also in the news media, and framing of women and stereotyping do exist in this part of the global south, and that's also influenced sometimes the media coverages. Now, in terms of state of research at the university level, I mean, which when Jatin was sending the topic that there are 3 or 4 areas, one of the things I thought that while we are talking about the media coverage, I mean, we do talk a lot about their responsibility, how they are behaving, how they're covering these incidents. But I think this is also important for us, I mean, the media, the academics and the researchers to evaluate our own work and to see how we are looking at the media coverage, how we're studying the media coverage of rape and sexual violence of women. One of the things that I have particularly noticed that somehow it has been confined within the university assignments, or at best a big thesis at the undergrad or the grad level. I mean, I've been teaching the media and communications department, and every year I try to look at the topics been covered as assignment or undergrad thesis by the students. Not many on these topics. Maybe like out of 30, out of 40, could be 3, 4. Not every year we get a student doing a master's thesis on women issues, on violence, or the rape, for example. But there are some projects supported by the government, sometimes by the NGOs. The university faculty members are also engaged in that, sometimes as students. But some of the researchers are supported by donors, and some are by human rights organizations. When it is being supported by NGOs, INGOs, or donors, they have their own parameter. So they have their own scopes and then objectives of doing their research that may not be always very compatible with the academic inquiries. So those are most of the action researches they do on the state of media coverages of rape and sexual harassment. But what I'm trying to say, they lack the in-depth inquiry, the academic inquiry. Some of the, there are some influential studies being supported by rights organizations. One thing I should mention here, that since we don't have any such big movement like Nirbhaya or #MeToo, so these studies lacks a kind of, bridging any connection between a social movement and the findings of the study. In relation to the conceptual or the theoretical issues, I think most of the studies are done under gender and media framework. So if the university level and media and communications department, you have a gender and media course. So it's mostly, the students or the faculty members engaged in gender and media courses do this kind of study. But others who are studying cultural studies or mass communication courses or journalism courses, they take little interest in doing all these things. And the perspective again, quote unquote, gender and media. Well, what I'm trying to say, the critical analysis is very popular here in Bangladesh and also in South Asia. Cultural studies is also very popular, but I see very little initiative from the faculty members or from the researcher or from the students to look at the media coverage or issues of rape and violence from cultural study perspective or from critical studies perspective. So it has been confined within gender and media studies mostly. Lack of interdisciplinary work. I mean, there is hardly any collaboration between or among various different departments. So the work has been a bit sporadic, like, the gender department, like gender women studies department are doing their own research of the media coverage of rape and sexual harassment. Anthropology department is doing their work. Sociology is doing their own work. Political science, very little. Communications department did in their way, but not really in a holistic manner. So the work has been a little bit sporadic. As a whole, it's failing to, create an impact on the social movement or, on the media coverage or on the media policy changes. And then researchers also, do not, tend to find the recommendations. These researchers also lack of recommendations, even if it is done quite rigorously. It's difficult to use it. What I mean, the rights organizations or those who are interested in looking into this coverage cannot always use this. And again, the studies supported by NGOs, INGOs, and international organizations are not disseminated duly. I mean, they commission a work, the work is done, and it is shelved or it is lost. I mean, you don't see them again. So lack of dissemination is also another problem. That who is doing what? I mean, you don't see, and we don't meet each other. And another methodological problem is most of the studies are done based on the secondary sources. So when a researcher is relying on newspaper coverage or the television, whatever the footage or the programs, but not really doing any kind of consulting the primary sources. What I've understood from previous speakers' presentation, that this is very important to find the case studies. So little effort is being taken by the media and communication researchers to go to the field and to collect the primary information, try to contact the victims or those who have been harassed or abused, and then put it into a case study. So it's mostly the secondary research-based approaches. And as a methodical approach or theoretical approach, the very popular thing is the content analysis. So in relation to media coverage of rape and sexual harassment, you say, well, we have done a content analysis of the television programs, or the reports of the newspaper reports, editorial, blah, blah, but not really, going to the ground, talking to the primary sources, talking to the victims, or making an liaison with them, so that case studies can be developed. And the studies are mostly qualitative in nature, not really the statistical research. But there are practical issues related to research, planning, execution, and publication. And one of the things is that accessing information is quite difficult here. I mean, you can find the newspapers, you can find the television programs or reports, but accessing other information sometimes is not very easy to access. And using social, sometimes the researchers try to rely on the social media posts, but again, it is difficult to verify the sources. So due to the lack of very reliable sources, it's not always easy for a researcher to rely on the social media information. Well, the researches done by the NGOs and rights organizations are considered to be important, but again, as it is not very effectively disseminated, cannot always be used. That's another problem of planning any research or planning for any publications. But there are good reports recently. Like last year, there is an increase in number of the child rape. I mean, there's been lots of incidents, and then all of a sudden the news media jumped into and start giving coverage to that. And one organization called Aino Shalishken, those who are working in India might be aware of this organization. It's a women's rights organization. So they published a report saying that in 2020, in the first 9 months, there is a reported case of 900 plus of cases of women and children's rape in Bangladesh. Of them, around 200 were gang rape. So the issue is there, the crisis is there, the problem is there, but the research focus is not sufficient enough to analyze the coverage, as well as the ethnographic researches, I would say, relying on the primary information. And then academic researchers, the problem is that since they are not bigger in scope, done in a very limited scopes, then not only disseminated properly, but cannot really aim at contributing to the social activism, and not always even consulted by the reporters. I mean, I don't see many reporters are coming to the university or to the academia and asking for the researches or the research findings. Rather, they rely mostly on the research findings done by NGOs or the rights organizations. And I think some of the academic researchers are not sound enough or quality enough, as I said, to be able to use it for activism or for any social movement. So the regardless of all these things, there are obviously prospects of doing good results in this part of Global South. And one of the things I would recommend that doing collaborative studies, that could be one of the possibilities, and combining all our experience. For example, someone has done in Egypt, in India, and followed a specific framework or methodology or any particular research framework, which can be replicated in other parts to do the similar kind of studies. Although, the ground reality might be different, but there are obviously the common experiences of media coverage by the traditional media and also in the social media. And then I think we also need to provide better access. Access of the women I'm talking about, so that they can come up and do the studies. And most of the studies, if it is done by the male folks only, it also lacks a certain perspective and can very easily get biased. So I think more women should be encouraged, along with the other researchers who's already doing this, so that they can take a fresh look at the issues of the coverage. And I do prefer alternative platforms as well, like social media, which is obviously very important. But again, we have to keep in mind that in the Global South, it's not very easy for the rural women, or the women living outside the city area or the urban areas to access social media. And they also lack the media literacy as well. So you shouldn't expect them to participate in the social media and writing that post either in Bangla or in English, for example, and disclosing their experiences or sharing their experiences. Although the internet penetration is quite good, but one shouldn't expect that all of a sudden there would be a revolution in the social media, that women in the Global South come up and find this alternative social media space and do the revolution. And it will take time. So like what Pallavi said, the traditional media still plays an important role, and there should be a combination of both the traditional media and the social media spaces. I think I have to stop here really, and then maybe we'll be talking more in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Very great. That was so excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Reza. And I'm going to, provide time for everyone to ask questions. And then if there's a little time, the panelists can ask questions. But I had two that I'm going to piggyback on a very good question here, which is, Dr. Reza, you mentioned campaigns versus movements, and it's more episodic in Bangladesh with campaigns. Versus reporting, the phenomena is more campaign-like than movement-like. And you talked about siloed work and gendered research. And then so the question that I'm going to connect that with, those points with, are the lack of interest in conducting research on the topic of media coverage of sexual violence is of interest. This is from Dr. Gonzalez de Bustamante. She would like to know if you could comment on the factors that are behind the lack of interest.
Okay, yeah, I understand. I mean, she's very right. I mean, I repeatedly try to remind you that we don't have this big movement here. I mean, this is very surprising that India had such a big movement. And what Pallavi is referring to, I mean, there is considerable media coverage here in Bangladesh. Almost every day we try to follow what's happening in India and in other, particularly in Delhi and the areas surrounding Delhi. But here we don't have that kind of movement. We have campaigns, and the campaigns are short-lived. There's a sporadic, short-lived, and very incident-oriented. Let me give it one example. One university student was raped, from Dhaka University. So it's a university students, or the students talked about the campaign they took to the street. You can understand, it has its own temporal impact. And the authority of the government responded very quickly. The guy was captured and, was taken to the task. But it's not a movement. So similarly, in the academic world, there may be different answers. The gender studies people may have one kind of answer. But from media and communication perspective, I think it is unfortunate that sometimes the researchers do not find it quite trendy, not very beneficial in terms of making a career in the academia, or they think whether this is going to really help them working or flourishing in non-governmental organizations. Although there are lots of rights organizations. I said 3,000 to 5,000 NGOs are working here. And there are NGOs like BRAC, which is internationally known. They're working desperately for the last few decades, last 3-4 decades, championing women empowerment. But still, doing study on the sexual violence or rape is not yet a popular topic. I mean, one of the reasons I think could be the social sensitivity surrounding it. There is a silencing process about it. It's a very patriarchal society still. I mean, women coming, so that could be who sets the agenda in the news media and also in the academia. And that directly or indirectly also impact the mindset of the students and also the researchers. So they are not sensitized enough. Thus, in terms of finding it interesting, I mean, using the interesting word in terms of popularity, that this could be equally important, like any other studies within the cultural studies, within mass communication, or in the critical studies. So one of the reasons I would answer that we have failed, or we are failing to make them interested in doing this research and saying that this is like any other social issues, this is any other outstanding international issues, this is any other rights issue. So it is our failure in one sense that we haven't been able to encourage them. But in other aspects, in the problems with the media are multifaceted. One could be the policy changes. There has been a serious policy lag on the part of the news media taking these decisions and changing these old attitudes. And in terms of the applied researchers or the action researchers by the NGOs, the problem is the disseminations, problem is setting the particular parameter. And again, the overall problem is that none of these researchers are really related to or connected to even if it's a short-lived, with these social campaigns against. I mean, this is what I have understood. Yep.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Dr. Mona Badran to all the presenters. The question is for the respected presenters is if violence against women increases because of political, economic, and social factors, which one has more weight in such problems, and what are some of the recommendations? Can you please share to decrease this increasing rate of violence against women?
I can start because I also have a question from Dr. Badran previously. So let me take the opportunity to answer both, if that's okay. So wonderful presentations to both the panelists. And let me start by answering Dr. Badran's first question. She had asked in the chat, any recommendations to raise awareness for rape survivors to talk specifically in countries where this is considered a taboo to tackle? So one of the things that I came to know through this research, that sexual violence survivors, they want a safe space, especially in rural, semi-rural communities, to speak like in person. So for them, the safe space is when someone is talking to them in person who is more relatable. In most cases, the activists here, they play the role of, if I may say, like, loving aunt or elder sister. So they want that connection. So social media is not the space for them. So for them, it's the personal connection, the personal space. And that's very important to recognize and acknowledge. And that helps the activists who are working to kind of build a narrative and take it forward. If possible, sometimes speaking with journalists, and if not, then they just take it forward and try to seek justice through their activism. For your second question, Dr. Badran, you asked if political factors, economic factors, and social factors, which one would be more which one has more weight and giving recommendations? So I saw both political and social factors giving more weight, having more weight rather in such problems, because social and political factors, they together try and, you know, help in the creation of political policies. If there is a public narrative that is formed through social factors, then political policies are formed. Of course, there is a political, economic aspect to it, of course, but economic aspect, it gives the final push, if I may say. So it's politics and social, and then economics, like, you know, how much you can spend or where they are located. Even activism costs money now, unfortunately. So that's the final push, you may say, that helps in creating recommendations, as well as finally creating political policies to support sexual violence survivors. Thank you.
Go ahead, other panelists, if you, I noticed there's.
I might add to that. I do agree with Pallavi that, you know, the first thing is the breaking the social taboo. I mean, that's something is very, very important. You know, what I mentioned, that even at the university level, the students are depending on the secondary sources, what has been reported in the news media. They're not going to the primary sources. They're not going to the rape victim or the person who has been abused. So again, the barrier is that because of the social taboo, even if you go there, it's not very easy to, you know, manage to speak to a rape survivor. So there is a need for a social space or a safe space. I mean, there are some initiatives taken by NGOs, even by the government, you know, taking them to kind of shelter home or giving them counseling and all this thing, but that's not enough. I mean, you need a kind of culturally sensitive, safe space and social space where the journalist can, you know, talk to them, the research can talk to them, even the policymakers, those who are, you know, thinking of doing something about, can talk to them. So that space is very important. And this lead us to that discussion, which is what is important, the social or the political or the economic. I mean, if you look at the rising economic condition of the global south these days, including Bangladesh, which is prosperous, it's increasing like anything. Even during this Corona period, the overall growth is tremendous and extraordinarily, you know, commendable. But it doesn't guarantee that, you know, you have been able to create a very safe space for women and for the rape survivors. So I think it's also historical and it's also cultural. I mean, even if I don't use the word religious or patriarchy or all these heavy words, but it's cultural and historical as well. So always economic progress, you know, doesn't make sure that, you know, you are safe. And because if you look at the Bangladesh women case in the garments industry, they're earning well, they're contributing, they have an independent life now. If you look at the media coverage in the Western world, they say the Bangladesh women are doing fantastic, working in the garment sector, earning, having their independent life, managing good life. But it doesn't guarantee that you are free and you are not, you know, not in a situation where it could be raped or could be embarrassed sexually or abused sexually. So I think you cannot actually separate them, that only economic development or only, you know, social development to ensure that you are safe and you will not be raped or you will not be embarrassed or harassed. Rather, it's a combination of all these 3 and 4. Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Albiati. Thank you, Dr. Reza.
I wanted to comment on that first, on the sources. Well, I think it's very hard to access victims directly, but I have done before a research where I interviewed NGOs and journalists and people dealing with those issues, and these I consider first-hand sources, even though they are not the survivors themselves. Maybe in the case study, I was presenting the blog, the testimonies on the blog. I would consider them first-hand sources, even though I didn't, because this is the only way to access them without harming them. Because, you know, if you interview survivors, you might harm them psychologically or something like that. This is for how to conduct research. For the factors that contribute to the widespread of sexual violence and rape and sexual harassment and all this, I would say it's mainly government, because the government is the one who can enforce the law, and if the law is enforced on everyone, this will definitely limit the amount of those crimes. I think so. If everybody knows that he's going to be punished, or there is a system for punishment that is effective, this will probably make a difference in my viewpoint. I don't know. So those are the 2 points I just wanted to mention.
Excellent point. The impunity aspect is a whole, we could form a panel on that before long. Dr. Deb Icott of University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, can we ask this question? And can our panelists share examples of clever campaigns in traditional media or social media to confront misogyny?
I can go. But before that, I do want to respond to Shamim, your concern, as well as what you bring up, that why more students are not doing research on sexual violence. Very briefly, I just want to respond because it's a thought I had after interviewing all my participants. It's a very emotional process, especially as a woman who have been raised in India, and I kind of recognize the emotional collection that you go through, not just while interviewing, but also writing. So that could be one of the reasons, and that was one of the reasons why I categorically decided not to include child sexual abuse in my research, because I couldn't get myself to talk about it. I'm a mother of an 11-year-old, so for me it was very difficult. So I can totally get that why there might be that hesitation of being emotionally involved in the process. Just a thought to share. Dr. Oikot, difficult question. I don't know if it's a clever way of campaigns, but what I can say that just focusing on any one platform does not give the constant push. And one example I'm going to share is very recent. It's ripped jeans on Twitter. I don't know if you've seen. It's like it's a trending on the Indian Twitter space about ripped jeans. Some politician made some comment about women wearing ripped jeans, and there's been all sorts of controversy. It's trending a lot on Twitter, but I haven't seen anything on any news version of or news media. I really haven't seen that. So people use different kinds of hashtag to confront misogyny, in Twitter space, especially when a political leader says so. If you remember, I think around 2014, 2013, 2014, especially during the election campaign in India, one of the leaders says, "Boys will be boys." And then there was a lot of, trending hashtag that, yes, boys will be boys, but why don't they learn? So something like that. So, when there is, I would say, collaboration between the two kind of platforms and more focus, like people are writing editorials, opinion posts, as well as there is also focus from the journalists, that becomes a more strategic campaign, I would say. So yeah, my 2 cents. Thank you.
I think I might just add to that. In fact, there is no one single answer to this, actually. If you are doing this campaign kind of thing in the global south, you understand these are so deeply rooted. Some of those things are very historically rooted. It's not very easy to outweigh that, by one single campaign or even by one single movement. So, and when you talk about from the global north's perspective, always think media means media. There are non-media approaches as well. So if you are dealing with the rural people, the potential, those who are always in the threat of, being abused or being harassed, I think there are lots of non-media communication approaches are also needed. So from, if I use that very campaign to media mix, so rather than relying on one single approach, you have to do many things, and with a campaign only or with the movement alone, I mean, you cannot really, bring about the intended changes and the prejudice against women. So it has to be both the media approaches and as well as the non-media approaches, but the policy approaches as well as non-policy approaches, the cultural approaches, I think.
You're muted. You're muted.
Okay.
Thank you, professors. We have a question from Dalal Radwan. She's a graduate of the University of Arizona program. She's joining us from the West Bank. She's a teacher, college professor there. She'd like to ask the question about the role of journalists that they play in reporting on sexual violence. How does diversity within the newsroom impact media news coverage reporting on sexual violence? Great question.
I think it's a great question. We do expect that situation. I mean, again, look at the newsroom structure, and particularly in the South. I mean, if you look at this, India might be a slightly in a better position, but look at the situation in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and Nepal, and in this part of South Asia, and particularly if you stretch it up to the Southeast Asia, for example, it's a male-dominated newsroom. So who decides? Who sets the agenda? Who does the gatekeeping? Who decide what to do and not to do, writing an editorial, doing the reports, and selecting the articles, the opinions. It's people like me, the males only. So if it's a diversity, there is a balance in the newsroom. I'm sure that's going to impact greatly in the coverage of the rape and sexual harassment, in setting agenda. I think the most important is to set media agenda. So they are also campaigners. If the media, they don't come up and they contribute to the social movement and to the positive campaigns, it's very difficult to, sustain that over a longer period of time. So the diversity is always expected in planning, in policy, and decision making in the newsroom, both. Yeah.
Professor Albiati.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to comment on that. Actually, in Egypt, for example, we have more women journalists than men. Yeah, this is a fact of life. Even if you go to colleges of mass communication, you'll find more girls than boys. But the thing is that there is no priority for covering women issues, and not just sexual violence, anything related to women. There is no prioritizing for those issues, and it's not up to the journalist what to cover and what not to cover. Unless they do this on social media, on independent media, on online media, which is predominantly blocked in Egypt, by the way, and so on. So this is diversity would have been different if there is freedom, for example. Yeah. Avali.
Great point.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so again, great question. And I'm just going to try to respond this from what I understood through the interviews. So in Indian newsrooms, when any incident of sexual violence and rape happens, it is preferred that women journalists go to cover it. And one of the reasons that it happens so, because of the sense of lived experience. So you kind of know what kind of questions to ask, because women journalists have lived experience of sexual harassment, and also because of sensitivity. That's also one of the reasons. So diversity and inclusivity both are very important in the context of newsrooms. Well, how the news is edited and how it's presented, that's a different story and a different conversation, because that depends a lot on the news cycle of the day. But as far as coverage is concerned, most journalists I spoke with and most newsrooms, at least the bigger ones, they prefer a female journalist goes and speaks with the survivor, the victims, or even the families of the survivors and victims. Just so, like I said, being more sensitive, people are more comfortable speaking with female journalists, as well as they can ask the questions through their lived experience.
Excellent point. Do we have any other questions? We'll check the chats here. I don't know if the presenters have any questions for one another before we sign off. I'm looking in the chat right now. I think we're good. Well, this was an amazing gathering. Oh, let's see here. What do we have? It looks like we have a question we have a question. It's while reporting about rape cases, we usually see headlines like "a woman was raped," taking the attention off of the perpetrator by using passive language. With coverage of such issues, the presentation also plays a major role. Small details affect psychologically. That's not easily noticeable to commoners. Even if the news reported is valid and correct, the semantics of delivering news is also important. How can this practice change?
I can answer that if that's okay. So yes, framing of news is very important. Thank you for the question, Priyanka. I want to start by, a lot of it is related to the legalities. It's framed as a woman has been raped because they still, or you would see the word used as it's under investigation, has been raped. So passive language is used because the incident is still under investigation. So that is one of the reasons that I understood why the passive language is used. But if I kind of did a thematic analysis of rape coverage between 2005, 12, 16, and then 19, and I found that some of the language and framing has changed. And one of the reasons for this change is social media platforms, because now journalists get called out. They have their handles, and if the public is, when they see victim blaming happening, they do call out, and they don't want to be called out. So there is a move, there is a push towards moving away from victim blaming, but a lot of it is still there. Alleged, the word, such as the use of the word alleged, it's because of the legalities involved. So that was one of the revelations as well that I understood.
That's excellent. Thank you. We have a question pointing out that some of these same things have happened in Mexico with respect to protests against sexual violence. Leaders of newsrooms began to intentionally send women to cover the protests because men were being attacked at the protests. That's an interesting point. Just wanted to add that. That's from Dr. Gonzalez de Bustamante. Any final words from the panelists?
I think with regard to the semantics of delivering news, yes. I mean, that's very important. But in Bangladesh, I mean, as far as my experience goes, we tried a lot of training them. First, not disclosing their names, how to respect their identities, blah, blah, everything. But that didn't change. And then after a few years, we decided, is it really not really working of teaching the reporters or the journalists only? Let's talk to the policymakers of the newspapers. I mean, the editors or the news editors or whatever, the shift in charts. And again, then referring to Pallavi, then it's not only important of sending the women to cover that incident, but it is important how it is presented, how it is edited. So that that's very important, and you cannot develop that overnight. I mean, it's a practice, and the practice has been influenced and shaped by many other factors. So I think that's very important. One positive change might be noticed in this part, that some of the serious newspapers, both the English and the Bengali is the local language here. I mean, they have been very particular about, writing their headline, about publishing photos. And in some cases, if, to take into consideration the legal issues or the implications of writing this thing, because there might be libel or, there are lots of other things related to that. So if they're quite definite, yes, I mean, that person is responsible for that. Sometimes they have taken the risk of publishing the photo of the rapist. Quite a risky thing to do that, but they did that. So things have changed, and things are changing gradually. But the semantics of delivering news is not very easy thing. I mean, it's a matter of practice, and it's a matter of decision making, but more of practice and how you deliver it. So it's a skill as well, and depending on how you are hiring a persons and giving them proper training, and then giving them a space, allowing them to write this news freely, that can really make a big change. I mean, we would love to see this thing, but unfortunately, it's progressing very slowly. And the way we look at it from English perspective, that it is the way we write it in English, and the way it's been written in Hindi or in Urdu or in Bangla, it looks very different then. So the semantics or the meaning changes again. So it again, depending on the language system or the linguistic pattern in which the journalism is being practiced.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good. Well, we want to thank our distinguished panelists, Dr. Rasha, Dr. Guha, and Dr. Albiati, for sharing their impressive work, their analyses and perspectives, and our fabulous audience as well for attending and asking such poignant questions. We will be inviting you all to a panel next month focused on looking at online harassment and abuse of journalists and dealing in the way the trauma is dealt with. So, looks a little bit taking a little bit of what you all are looking at and maybe looking at it from a slightly different perspective. But it was it was my honor to facilitate this wonderful panel, and I want to thank you all very much for joining us from all different parts of the world. We really appreciated it. Take good care, huh?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you,
Thank you
Pallavi.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Jyoti.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.